Welcome, friends. Glad you're here. Welcome, welcome. So we're going to get started. Again, I am so delighted to welcome you here today as we are opening the Greening Our Faith Community Summit. I'm the Reverend Amy Brooks Paradise, and I work as an organizer with Green Faith. And on behalf of Clean Air Carolina and the City of Charlotte, Eco America, Good Solar, and our many sponsoring organizations, I extend a warm welcome to all of you. Again, we are so glad you're here. With me here this afternoon to welcome you are the Reverend Dennis Testerman, Stewardship of Creation Enabler with the Presbytery of Charlotte, and the Reverend Dr. Rodney Sadler, Associate Professor of Bible with Union Theological Seminary and Director of the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation. Integral to this effort today is the planning team that worked so hard to make this possible, including June Blotnick with Clean Air Carolina and her amazing staff, former Mayor Jennifer Roberts with Eco America, Ethan Blumenthal with Good Solar, Heather Bullock and Katie Riddle with the City of Charlotte, Reverend Janet Garner-Mullins and Ruth Tansel. So now you know who we are. And so I'd like to find out who you are. Before we go any further, we'd like to see who's in the room. So you should see a poll come up on your screen. And we ask you to fill that out so that we know who's here today. Go ahead and click the dot that represents your tradition. And I don't know what else is on that poll, but please fill it out. We'd love to have a good idea of who's here today. And I think in a moment, will we be able to see, will you be able to show us what the poll shows?
Yes.
Great. So as soon as everybody fills that out, we'll share that back with you and we'll all know who's in the room.
Okay, should I stop the poll now?
Sure.
Okay.
People have had a moment to do that. That's great. All right. We have a preponderance of Christians, but we have a good representation of others, Unitarian Universalists, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist. We're missing a few here. Maybe they'll join us later. We're so glad you're all here. A multi-faith opportunity. Perhaps one of the most important things we can do as we embark upon a conversation about faith and climate is to remember our connection to the land. How we treat the earth is at the crux of the problem we face. Thus, many people in climate work have begun to incorporate land acknowledgements into their work in order to ground their efforts. So I would like to now invite Reverend Testerman to lead us in a land acknowledgement.
Recognizing that diversity is what makes us all so rich, I am going to be speaking out of the particulars of my traditions as a Christian and as a resident of the greater Charlotte region. The signs of our Native American forebears, predecessors in this area are all around us. They are part of the signs of the land if we have eyes.
Dennis, I think you've muted yourself. It still seems to be muted.
Third time's a charm.
There you go.
I want to start by land acknowledgement by reading text from a plaque that's on next to the Settlers Cemetery in downtown Charlotte. Native Americans have occupied this part of the Catawba River Valley for more than 10,000 years. First came the Paleo-Indian hunters following big game and spreading their Ice Age culture south. Later, archaic Indian peoples adapted to climate changes and developed a sophisticated hunter, fisher, gatherer technology, which served them well for thousands of years. By 1,000 years ago, local Native Americans were practicing a woodland Indian lifestyle. From fields and streams, they skillfully drew the materials they needed to sustain their way of life. Stone, bone, wood, and shell gave them tools. Trees, grasses, and other plants were processed into shelter. These, plus a rich array of animals, provided food and clothing. Cultivating the soil, they added yet other resources and security to their lives. The earth itself yielded clay for pots. By the time the Spanish arrived in the area in the 16th century, Native Americans had developed large towns, long-distance trade networks, and political alliances both north and south along the Catawba River. They were the Ishwa, people of the river. We would come to know them as the Catawba. After the Spanish came, European American traders and settlers, an influx of new deadly diseases, and the loss of most of their ancestral land with the Treaty of Nations Ford in 1840. The Catawba Indian Nation is today centered in York County, South Carolina, just south of Charlotte, a vital part of this area's rich history. But this history is incomplete. In the tradition of the Christian Holy Scriptures, Jesus said that the very stones will cry out when all voices are not heard. So we acknowledge that the land we live on and worship on is land sacred to and stewarded by the Catawba, Sugaree, and other indigenous nations in this region and throughout our country for thousands of years. Our state and federal governments often did not recognize sovereign rights and did not honestly and fairly negotiate terms of coexistence. We honor the Catawba who still reside here in this region and who demonstrate their talents and gifts amidst a backdrop of ongoing colonialism and oppression.
Thank you so much, Dennis, for sharing that with us. Friends around the world, people of faith are speaking up about the devastation being caused by rising sea levels, flooding, drought, wildfires, and pollution, which threatens the lives of so many. Likewise, in every faith tradition, we find teachings that the earth is a sacred gift from God and that human beings are charged with the care of that gift. So as we move through this day and into tomorrow, I hope that we can hear clearly that the faith community has a unique role to play in the conversation about creation care and climate justice. I hope that the presentations and conversations we have together will persuade and inspire you to step more fully into this conversation and guide you to take even bolder action than you already have. And now I would like to invite my colleague, the Rev Dr Rodney Sadler, to share a few opening remarks with you as well. Thank you, Dr. Sadler.
Thank you, Reverend Brooks. It's great to be with you all today. I just want to say briefly, I know that we're running a little behind, but we come here together today as a group of people concerned about the planet and worried about climate justice. The climate is significant because we cannot live if we destroy the climate of our planet. We cannot destroy the environment of our planet and expect that people will be able to live and survive and thrive. And people are important. We can't be here today and not acknowledge the divisions that exist among us. Right now, there's not just struggle in America over Blackness versus whiteness, in Israel and Palestine over who is the owner of the land. In so many different places between rich and poor, young and old, we are divided. But we need to realize that in order to have victory over the climate crisis in which we find ourselves today, we've got to come together. We've got to come together as people concerned about justice for people and for the planet, realizing that if we work together, we can overcome the crises we find ourselves in. So I invite you today to leave your divisions behind. I know our hearts are burdened by so much, but to walk together in a newness of identity, to recognize that we are all created B'Tselem Elohim. Each and every one of us is equal in God's sight, and therefore we need to respect each other. We will only have victory when everyone works together at a common table, giving all that God has poured into them, working towards a greater future for us all. May God guide us in this common work, and may we see the value of each and every human being as we work to save our common planet. God bless you all.
Thank you, Reverend Rodney. Appreciate you so much. And now I would like to turn over our time together to Jennifer Roberts as she will introduce her panel, and we will hear from our first set of speakers.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you, Reverend Brooks and Dr. Sadler for that great introduction. I'm Jennifer Roberts, former mayor of Charlotte and currently with Eco America and director of Path to Positive Communities with that national nonprofit. I want to welcome you to this of our first panel that's on climate challenges and impacts. You know, not too long ago, we used to talk about climate change as something that was going to happen in 2050 or 2100. But not anymore. We have seen, especially here in North Carolina, that impacts are here. Our summers are longer, the rain is more intense, our cities are hotter, the habitat is changing, and most important, climate change is impacting us, our health, our families, our property. Our first panel today is going to focus on some of the stories of climate impacts that they have seen from their unique perspectives. And if we have time, maybe some of the ways that they're confronting these challenges. I'm going to introduce them in alphabetical order. So on our esteemed panel today, we have Jeremy Goldsby, who is the co-founder of Table 33, which is a social justice and climate change collective, a grassroots organization to educate and empower underrepresented voices on sociopolitical and climate issues. He's a member of Smith's Chapel Church, and he's still at UNC Charlotte. So we have a student, and I'm going to have that youth voice. Our next panelist is Angela Gray. She is the founder and chairman of Roots in the Community, which is RICS, R-I-C-S, Market Foundation, and is currently working to open Charlotte's first full-service nonprofit grocery store. She was born in Mississippi, lived in Detroit, and now has been in Charlotte. She graduated with a BA in pure and applied mathematics and has been a consultant in technology and other areas. And she's also a member of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Climate Leaders. Next, we have Dr. Jennifer Lawson, who is a pediatrician at Duke, General Pediatric and Adolescent Health in Durham. And she has a humanistic transdisciplinary orientation. And through her collaborative project, Health as an Ecosystem, Expanding Our Imaginations of Health, she's become actively engaged in connecting climate change and health. She's a member of AAP chapter Climate Advocates Group, the North Carolina Pediatric Climate Task Force, and she is a North Carolina Climate Ambassador and really wants to focus on a lens of equity. Finally, we have Reverend Dr. Sheldon Shipman. He is the pastor and senior minister of Greenville Memorial AME Zion Church. He's been there almost 20 years, maybe longer, in the Hidden Valley community, which is an area in Charlotte bordered by highways and polluted air and health challenges that were made very clear by COVID. I'm sure that he'll be telling us more about that. Dr. Shipman has been a fierce community advocate, not just for Hidden Valley, but for all underrepresented and disinvested communities in Charlotte and beyond. He's also an entrepreneur and partial owner of the Vegan To Go Cafe on the West Side. Just saying, that's good food, y'all. So welcome to all of our panelists. I'm going to open it up to hear from you. And I'll just start you again in alphabetical order. Can you tell our audience how you have seen climate impacts affecting your community or your congregation? And then tell us about how you first got engaged in tackling climate change and in climate solutions. So we'll start with Jeremy.
Hello to all. Thank you all for coming today. Within my specific community, I am from Eastern North Carolina, which is heavily rural and also by the coast. One example of climate change affecting my community and congregation for that matter was Hurricane Florence in late 2018. As you all know, Hurricane Florence sat on the edge of North Carolina, specifically in the Wilmington area, for about 4 days, and it really devastated the community. If you don't know, the eastern part of North Carolina, for the most part, is financially challenged, and we do not have as many resources as the Raleigh-Durham area, the Triad, or Charlotte. So we are, challenged financially, and our resources are pretty low as well. So it took at least a few months to well into 2019 for us to fully recover. Some areas around Wilmington are still recovering and still building up. I know specifically some of my classmates are still living in RVs 3 years later. Still, depending on FEMA as well. So it is very challenging, and we're still adjusting to this day.
Thank you, Jeremy, for reminding us that across our state that there's still people recovering. Absolutely. Angela, I want to turn to you next to hear you talk about your project and involvement with climate solutions.
Yes, so for me, the two questions kind of go hand in hand. So as you mentioned in my introduction, I moved to Charlotte actually back in 2005. Actually, I left Detroit in 2005, moved to Charlotte in 2007 I had just completed my MBA and started a internship with one of the big banks here. And so had an opportunity to work with a career coach, and we were kind of talking about, well, what do you want to do when you retire? And I said, oh, I know that. I'm going to open a nonprofit grocery store. And I started to tell her all these things I was going to do when I was retired. And she asked, well, why don't you do it now? And I said, because I'm not rich, I'm not retired. I can't get involved in all these things right now. And so I gave her a lot of excuses, which she shot down all of them. And so I said, well, I'll look at least, the business plan. I just got out of business school, even see if this nonprofit thing is even possible. And so during that research is when I really started to realize how food was impacted by the climate, but also that climate, but it was also a cyclical relationship. And so food impacts the climate, and climate impacts food. And so I think that was really the first time I started to think about, wow, we could really build a grocery store that not only addressed health, but it also addressed the climate. And so we could reduce food waste. We could limit the amount of miles that food had to travel to get to a store. And so it was then that I really started to work with other organizations and started to become more of an advocate for climate. So.
Terrific. Thanks for that overview. Next, we turn to Dr. Lawson. I'll call you Jennifer.
Yes.
Good name, by the way.
Nice to have two Jennifers, right? Thank you for having me here today. And I really appreciated the opening welcome as well. So absolutely, I'm a general pediatrician who works in a setting in which we primarily care for an underserved community. So given the connections that we were already talking about with respect to climate health and equity, yes, absolutely. We're involved with this all the time. We have many of our patients have illnesses such as asthma and allergies, and we know that air pollution and heat have significant impact for these patients. As we just mentioned, healthy nutrition is important, and access is an ongoing concern in that regard. We know that climate diminishes the nutrient content of the foods we grow. Heat impacts health in a number of ways, from physical to mental. So heat and air pollution impact respiratory illnesses, but also have been associated with things like birth outcomes, like preterm birth and low birth weight, and which can have ongoing consequences as well. And then, as we've already mentioned, communities of lower socioeconomic status are generally more impacted by factors such as heat. And in fact, there are studies that note the overlap with redlining. And then, of course, as a pediatrician, like, children don't live in isolation, right? They live in community, and their parents are affected, right? So their parents' health are affected, is affected. They might have to take time off work, right? Which is an additional impact. And then, of course, these ongoing mental health stressors. So those are just a few examples of the intersections with health. And then we see that the climate change can exacerbate what's already extant in their lives. So as you mentioned earlier, as far as my particular path, I've always had sort of a very holistic approach to care, and I see. So I've often said our social workers do 80% of our job, meaning that it's that our patients' health is most impacted by the environments in which they live, and climate is part of that. So I've migrated this way through many ways, through like the Health That's Ecosystem Project, as we mentioned. And then I actually went to the Duke Divinity School for a year as a theology, medicine, and culture fellow, and took a class taught by Norman Wurzba called The Theology of Place. And he's just remarkable and opened up imaginations. And I think doing things like this, where we're building community, and so we become more engaged as we become more connected. So, thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. That sounds like a fascinating course, theology, medicine, and culture. Yeah, terrific. Finally, Dr. Sheldon Shipman, and we appreciate you. Sorry about the mix up in the time, but you look great.
No
You look like you're all set. So look forward to hearing your story.
Thank you so much, Mayor Roberts, and it's good to have a Dr. Jennifer and a Mayor Jennifer on this call at the same time. I'll make mine somewhat brief, so I know we have a very distinguished panel here. I'll go back to two particular, I'll call them acts, the 1956 Federal Highway Interstate Act, as well as the Housing Act of 1954. One caused interstates to go through various communities, and in particular, it seemed as though most of those highways went through brown and Black communities. We are part of that. Interstate 77 and Interstate 85. Interstate 85 directly intersects the Hidden Valley community. So you talk about air pollution, you talk about noise pollution, you talk about all of those pollutions that are part of this climate initiative. And I applaud all of the initiatives that you all are involved in. I became even more active when I began to pastor the church where I pastor now. It's been, you are correct, Jennifer, it was about 20 years. Actually 21 years. We were a church that was affected by, and I don't call it urban renewal, and my terminology is urban removal. We had communities that were removed and never had an opportunity to go back. My church was a part of what was known as the old Greenville community that's off of Statesville Avenue at that time. And we moved twice to finally end up where we are in Hidden Valley. And I'm an advocate for not only climate change and environmental justice, because unbeknownst to our former pastors, when they moved to the Hidden Valley area, we realized that when we purchased a property where my church is located, we were sold a piece of property that used to be a dump. And on top of that, we had to do some extra things to compact to be able to even build. And the dump was where? Located in the minority community of Hidden Valley. So my church is a constant reminder that we are literally living on top of what used to be a place where people threw their garbage. So there's no question. I have to be an advocate and just trying to continue to keep our congregation aware of not only the social injustices that we have to deal with that has been impacted even more so because of COVID, but also the environmental racism and environmental justices that we need to continue to stand up for. And I'll start with that. Thank you for having me today.
Dr. Shipman, I really appreciate the history and pointing out toward conscious policy decisions that were made in the highway bill and infrastructure spending, because we need to all understand that many of our communities ended up in very challenged environmentally and health challenged areas because of policy, because of people who look like me and decisions mostly white people made. And I acknowledge that. And I want to bring this question forward too, because equity is such an important part of solving the climate crisis. Recent polling shows us that most white people do not understand environmental racism. They do not know what redlining is. You know, almost 2/3 of white people, and actually a number of people of color, haven't heard it couched that way in those terms. So what I'd love to hear from you all is ways that you're working to help more people understand about these inequities. And also, you know, I think Jennifer, you really pointed this out well, the interconnectedness, that we don't just solve one thing, we have to look at everything together. So tell us a little more about how you're working to do that in your communities and how you're helping tell other communities who may be wealthier, who may be healthier, who maybe haven't seen what you've seen. How are you helping them understand? And anybody can start.
I guess I'll start. I guess the first, not necessarily like solution, but the first thing to address is racism in general. Just sometimes you just got to break it down for them, even though it is not our job to break down racism for people that perpetuate the system in the first place. Though, for reasons like you need to understand racism to understand environmental racism and what contributes it. Within my community specifically, we have the majority Hispanic population, and then it's white people, then Black people, then Native Americans, so on and so forth. And basically, it is a little difficult back at home to teach and inform white people of the privilege that they do have and what they're doing to our environment, because also we have more pigs than people in our county of Duplin. The big names in the county work with Smithfield, which is a, meat, your bacon, that comes from my county mostly. And within our county, there are major health departments in communities of color where there are factories not even 100 feet away. I volunteered at a health department as a file documenting person, whatever. And not even 50 feet away, there was a major pork plant, which, contributes to the CO2 in the area. A lot of people in my community have asthma / respiratory issues. And there was a point in time last year where my county had the highest cases of COVID-19 per capita. And like I said before, there are more pigs and people in my county. So you can see how major COVID hit us. Going into a much more richer area within the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area, more people are willing to speak and willing to listen, not willing to speak, willing to listen to what Black, Indigenous people of color have to say. And there are more receptive and more, they act more. I think it has to do with location and education as well. However, we have to really get down dirty and really put our foot forward and stand 10 toes down. Don't let your voice, make it be clear, and really explain to them what racism is, and then environmental racism is as well. What to do after is on them. However, we just keep going and, persevere.
Thank you for that. Anybody else want to jump in on that?
I can just add, I think we need to continue to sort of amplify and expand the education. So some of the things that I've done, we had a webinar series with the support of the Trent Center, one of my colleagues, that came out of that Health as an Ecosystem project called Climate Change, Health, and Social Justice. And we had an amazing panel of speakers who covered a variety of topics. The director of the Trent Center actually happened to do a project on the history of Durham and health inequities there, health disparities. And we, Reverend Shipman sort of alluded to his community, and we can also point to like 147 and the Durham Freeway in the Durham community and its impact on the Hayti community in Black Wall Street. And so that's something I talk about with, a number of us talk about with our students and our residents, and then make those connections to things like health and just the bigger picture as we talked about.
Yeah, and being part of an academic community helps, with more audiences as well, for sure. I see both Dr. Shipman and Angie have unmuted.
Ladies first, always ladies first.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to say that I think one of the challenges and one thing that we've done is, as we've looked at trying to find a location, it's amazing that there are communities in Charlotte that have been more than 3 decades without a grocery store in their neighborhood. And we know that that the challenge of trying to bring fresh, healthy food that's affordable to low income communities. And so one of the things we've done and actually we're doing a pilot with the health department, a program called Slice and Dice, where it's a cooking competition. And we talk about how the teams compete to prepare a fresh, healthy, nutritious meal on a budget. And one of the things, because I know people have said, oh, if you just shop right, or if you know how to, shop, you can eat healthy cheaply. And one of the things that competition has shown is that we had a team that was able to prepare a healthy meal, nutritious, for a family of 4 for under $25. However, to buy all of those items, it would have cost $87. And so sometimes it's being able to connect the dots and show people that, if you look at statistics and numbers, and that's one thing my math degree has really come in handy, is being able to show that, numbers can be manipulated. And if you don't understand and explain how those numbers are developed, because it looks at, when you talk about plate cost, how much a tablespoon of olive oil costs. Well, I can't go to the store and say, just give me a quarter worth of olive oil. I have to pay $14 for the whole bottle. And for some families, that's just not affordable, and it's not possible. And so we have to start to have those discussions and break down the numbers and get people to be able to see, really what are the inequities and struggles.
Yeah, look at
I'm just going to say amen to the math specialist, Sister Gray, who just spoke. That is, I was going to say something very similar. We discovered during the pandemic that there was a food instability. We already knew it because of where we're located. There is no major supermarket, and just being able to provide fresh food boxes during this pandemic. I'm very proud to say that the organization that I'm also involved with other churches, we provided over 80,000 boxes of food throughout the Charlotte area, but particularly also that helped Hidden Valley. And with what Dr. Jennifer said, these are, I learned a new word. And the new word that I learned last week is syndemic, which means that we are dealing with multiple epidemics at the same time. So when you're talking about racism, you're talking about social injustice, you're talking about environmental injustice, you're just health disparities that already existed before COVID. And now we're dealing with the trauma and the mental health issues that are just as pervasive now, if not more so, because of people trying to come out of the pandemic. And my last comment would simply be, we really need to
Hello?
continue with the education of
Hello?
trying to, Dr. Sadler, we can hear you, sir, my friend. Amen. We need to continue with the education of, I'm going to call it dismantling the myth of race. Because when you actually go back to understand where race began, or the understanding of the categories of where race began, and had no biological basis, no empirical evidence to support it. It was based on economics and a variety of other things. We need to just dismantle the myth itself and realize that we're all human beings. I'll stop with that. Amen.
Well, you know, Dr. Shipman, you really raised something that's so important, and we look at impacts. And again, this is something, unless you have lived in a house that's been flooded out 3 times, or you've had to escape a hurricane, or if you've lived in a moldy house, or you have everybody around you has asthma, you don't realize the trauma that comes with this. And there's sort of a twofold trauma. There's the trauma of suffering from impacts that are often repeated and persistent, and impact whole families, because families live in the same, areas. But there's also what I hear from young people who read a lot, and there's so many more stories now about climate change and about how it's really multiplying all these challenges. There are people who think, what's the world going to look like 30 years from now? Am I going to even be able to retire? Am I going to be able to have a career or any kind of a life? And so what I want to hear from you, especially because you are a person of faith and you've been, trained in counseling, and you've done a lot of counseling. How do we work with this, what we call eco grief, and then the trauma that each of you can address, and that's the the trauma of weathering, of just the repeated exposure to traumatic events related to climate and racism.
Wow, and you expect a Black minister to answer that in less than 5 minutes?
If you start, we'll get our other 3 to chime in as well. I have faith in you.
I mentioned the word syndemic because it is my new word, simply because of the multiplicity of epidemics that we're dealing with at the same time. Let me give you a perfect example. My congregation and the families that I have, we have a congregation of about 500, and dealing with the various deaths that they have occurred. I've done more funerals since March 15th, 2020. I've done more funerals this year than I've done in the last 5 years. Dealing with individuals, not only with the grief, and then, as you mentioned, young people, we have to encourage them that we have to be good stewards of wellness, and that is wellness of ourselves as well as wellness of our environment. And you have to just to maintain the stewardship that you can do for yourself. You can do it a little bit at home, do whatever you do at home, and then continue to practice that and teach others. My wife is the first lady of a church, but at the same time, she is the first lady of recycling in our community. And she will beat you across the head with a plastic bottle if you do not recycle it. So you start small, but you have to continue. You start telling people you do your part, and then start doing the education of trying to help other people to understand the seriousness of the time window that we have to start making some significant changes. And if we do it one by one on a small basis, collectively with what you all are doing with this initiative, then we can try and affect some powerful policy changes that need to be made in order for us to be able to make that window. I hope I'm making sense, because I get emotional about this and I think about it.
No, absolutely. I think empowering people, helping them have the agency to take action is absolutely one way to deal with that. And since you mentioned young people, and I did too, I'm going to turn next to our young person, Jeremy. How do you see, your colleagues kind of dealing with this eco grief and trauma?
It's not going well. Like my generation, Gen Z specifically, we deal with this stuff through humor, dark humor at that. You ask any person around my age, I'm 19. So you ask any person near my age range, we're just like, man, I don't know. I'll just let life go as it flows, I guess. And I saw a tweet this morning. They said, like, I don't even have a 5-year plan. I just live day by day because you never know what's going to happen. Like there already was no guarantee for tomorrow, but now because of, higher up people and big name corporations just pumping waste into our atmosphere and, along with the multiple pandemics and epidemics that are going on within the world, specifically people that look like me, yeah, we are not taking it well. We, dark humor here, dark humor there, just to, like, cope, I guess. But some of us are still hopeful. Most of us aren't. I can see both sides of the situation, but it's just the cold hard truth. We don't know. We don't have the answers. We can tell the older generations to do this, do that. Now that we are a voting age, we can only do so much but vote for people in and hit the streets as much as we can. But unless the people higher up do something,
Well, I just read an article today about a whole army of 16-year-olds who, through their tweets, were able to change something. I'll have to find that article and put it in the resources, because you young people actually have more power than you realize. And I'm going to turn to our clinician, Dr. Jennifer, to talk a little bit more about that, because I know that you see it from a public health perspective.
Yeah, my mind is going to many different connections here. So one is I do see hope in the youth. They're amazing. You, Jeremy, are amazing, and I think about seeing the remarkable things our youth does, but also wanting to make sure that we don't lay the whole burden on them, right? So we have to walk with them and help support them. So we have to hear their voice, see their knowledge, right? Respect that and support alongside. So I think that's really important. And so I think there's hope there. This is more nebulous, but I also have been thinking in this about just like, what does it mean to care? And what does it mean to love? So I think we can all ask ourselves that and then say, how do we act in answer to that? And then more specifically, we do know that there are extant solutions. There are. And then so more, in your space, Jennifer, is that advocacy. Like, so we need to mobilize the political will to act, because there are solutions out there if we embrace them.
Yeah, absolutely. And at Eco America, we always emphasize solutions. And so to go with the syndemic, we have a new word called multi-solve. And it is about being able to walk and chew gum at the same time, and to recognize that we can look at all of these things and multi-solve. But it takes all of us. It takes, so many of you use that word community. That's exactly what it takes. And we all have our own communities of influence that we can bring along with us. And so, Angela, I don't want to leave you out of the answer to how we deal with the eco grief.
Well, I think everyone shared a lot of good things. The one thing I thought, especially since this is a community of faith joining us today, I think one of the best ways is we have to get back to relying on faith, that there is, for me, a God that is bigger than all of this, and what we can't do, he can. And so I think communities of faith have a big role to play in making sure that, one, their congregations are aware of the situation, but also aware of the solutions. And so whether that's, community gardens at your church, or, orchards, churches have so much land a lot of times that goes underutilized, that we could that we could use as a resource to help combat this and bring communities together. So I think one of the best ways to address the situation is really for communities of faith to step up and bring us together and help lead us.
Terrific. No, absolutely. And communities of faith are doing a number of things, and we're going to hear more about that throughout today and tomorrow, because there's some great examples of, like you said, actually using land that they have at their house of worship, and also using their voice. And Dr. Shipman, I still remember when you and Dr. Sadler and I think Dr. Wary came to speak to the Charlotte City Council about a clean energy resolution and about a low carbon future. It was very powerful, and everyone has that opportunity to weigh in a democracy. And the voices of faith are incredibly powerful. We have about 2 minutes before the next session. I'm going to give each of you a minute to say what gives you hope for the future and for our young people like Jeremy.
And since I started last, I'm gonna go first to close. I want to just thank Dr. Jennifer for her words. And I really want to just encourage Jeremy and Sister Angela. You all are the face of our future. And I'm very grateful for what you already have involved in. But I want to really encourage Jeremy, because he goes to a wonderful school. That's my I'm an alumni of UNCC. Don't start. And I'm really grateful that you are involved in this at this particular time, 19 years old. Do not forsake the fact that, there's collective power in the number of youth that you can influence. And it's going to take you all. I'm looking forward to what you all are going to do to help change this entire situation. So thank you for your involvement.
Dr. Jennifer, you can go next.
Well, I think I alluded to some of it already in the hope in our youth, but also the hope in bringing together, interconnecting folks. We mentioned earlier about transdisciplinary interconnection, and I think that's really important. Building these bridges. When I hear about Angela, I think of other work I know where there's such great opportunities to teach, to have community gardens and to connect them with health spaces. And a colleague of mine in Ohio, when they redid her clinic space, they also brought in community voices actually in the process. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in that if we would just build the engagement.
So Jeremy and Angela, are you up to the challenge? Angela, you're in the young people group too.
Even though I'm not that young, but thank you. I just wanted to say, I think what brings me hope is, and actually to tie into what Dr. Jennifer just said, my organization, we call it RICS, but it stands for Roots in the Community. And we chose that name because we believe those roots are really made up of healthcare, nonprofits, government, businesses. The whole community has to come together to address climate, food, all of these racism, all of these major issues. And I have so much hope when I talk to other organizations that if we all come together, we definitely can find long-term sustainable solutions.
Jeremy.
One thing that gives me hope is just, community as a whole. Like my generation, Gen Z, we've already made a lot of stuff like happen and shaking the table as well, which comes naturally to more generations getting older and stuff like that. But with us specifically, we're handling so much already. There's so much on our plates as well, having to fix what other people messed up in our own little ways. That gives me encouragement because we've been doing pretty well so far. But one last thing I have to say is for the more grown adults than I, just leave a space and a table for us as well, because we have a lot to say. There are many perspectives that you don't hear, but are of such value that you never would get unless you open your ears and listen. So that is all I have to say.
And,
Thank
and
you,
the word you're looking for, Jeremy, is seasoned.
Yes, I'm one of those seasoned people, but Jeremy, my kids tell me that all the time. Just open your ears and listen.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And we are making space for that today. We're going to be recording all these sessions. People will be able to listen to you many times over. We hope to continue to promote the great teachings and learnings that we're getting today. So a big thank you to all our panelists, Jeremy, Angela, Jennifer, Sheldon. You guys have been amazing. You're really paving the way for a great discussion as we continue our summit. So thank you so much for your time today and for all you continue to do. And let's continue to build this community of collaboration and action and solutions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
stay with me. Those of you in the audience, stay with me, because now we are going to have a keynote from some amazing faith leaders. Our panel set it up just perfectly, talking about how faith is so important and that eco-grief. And I just want to say that I'm looking forward to the keynote address from Rabbi Judy Schindler, the response from Imam John Ederer. I'm going to be quick in my introduction because they're amazing. Rabbi Judy has been working on social justice in our community for as long as I can remember, and often through many challenging times. I remember going to Moral Monday protests with her in Raleigh. She's been a voice for the voiceless and the forgotten. She's the Scott Professor of Jewish Studies, a director of the Stan Greenspan Center for Peace and Social Justice at Queen's University in Charlotte. After 21 years in the pulpit, her website says she is thrilled to guide Queen's students through thousands of years of religious wisdom. But she continues to be active as an author, a speaker, working on issues ranging from affordable housing, diversity in schools, to LGBT inclusion and restorative justice. She's Rabbi Emerita of Temple Beth El in Charlotte, and also served as senior rabbi and associate rabbi in Scarsdale, New York. And so we want to welcome you, Rabbi Judy Schindler, for your words today.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Can hear you great.
Okay, wonderful. Well, how inspiring. Oh my gosh, nonprofit supermarket. Jeremy, a student at UNC, leading the way, and my colleagues and friends, Dr. Sadler, Dr. Shipman, and it was great to hear from Dr. Jennifer and Jennifer Roberts. You are a true leader. Dear Earth, we come to you as people of faith from across the state and beyond. We come to you virtually because our world is sick. And illness extends across the globe, COVID-19. I know you can feel it, you can sense it, you wonder why we wear masks outside when the air that surrounds should be so beautiful and so perfect to inhale. Earth, you wonder why, when we head outside to enjoy the sun that shines so beautifully and helps your vegetation to flourish with glory, you wonder why we cover ourselves with glasses and hats, clothes and lotions to protect ourselves from harm. You cringe that we have come to fear rains and their consequent floods, winds and their consequent hurricanes, when instead we should be standing in awe of the miraculous cycles of your natural world that you bring day and night, winter and summer, a rich harvest balanced by nature's resting. We should be celebrating them and capturing their power to power our lives. We learned so many lessons during this time of isolation. Mother Earth, we've learned how beautiful you are. As we have stopped during the year gone by, we've learned that our busyness, so much of our driving, our flying, our racing from place to place to get somewhere and do something was at your expense and often unnecessary. We are called human beings, but we have forgotten how to be in relationship with ourselves, with our neighbors, and most of all, with you. The first question of the Bible, a book that is embraced by billions of people of faith, is, where are you? Adam and Eve get lost in the idyllic Garden of Eden, and God asked them, where are you? Today, as we are slowly emerging from the pandemic and from this year of unfathomable pain, filled with death and violence and poverty, we stop to hear and ponder answers to that question. Where are you? In Hebrew, the first question in the Bible, where are you, is comprised of one word, ayeka. Those same letters form the first word of Lamentations, echa, which means how the city sits alone. In Lamentations, God weeps because Jerusalem sits alone after the first exile of the Israelites. Our cities are alone right now, but they need not be. In Genesis and in Lamentations, we are called to return, to get back to our ideals. And that is what we do right now at this summit. O earth, we have taken you, your beauty, and your richness and your resources for granted. And as a result, we stand at a risk of disconnection, divorce, or even worse, death. In Genesis, we were given simple instructions to guide our relationship with you. Adam, the first human being, was created from Adamah, the earth. That first earthling was told that he and consequently we have a twofold obligation to the soil that sustains us. God placed Adam in the Garden of Eden, in Hebrew, le'ovda ul-shomra, to till it and to tend it. The word ovda, to till, has the same root as the word avodah, which means both work and worship. Our relationship of working the land is a form of prayer. Boundaries were set so that as we labored over the land, we could protect it. One day a week, the earth gets a day of rest called Shabbat. 1 year in 7, the earth gets a sabbatical, a full year of lying fallow for rejuvenation, called in Hebrew Shemitah. In Judaism, nature is God's sanctuary. And caring for the environment requires sacrifices, which sadly we have failed to make. Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, is a Jewish mandate. The 16th century mystic Isaac Luria taught when God went to create the world at first, God needed to contract God's self to make room for the rest of creation. And so God contracted God's self into vessels, but the vessels could not contain God's light and they shattered. Much of the light returned to God, but some of that light still exists in shattered shards hidden in the material of our world. When we heal you, O earth, with acts large and small, we reveal and we release God's hidden light. Help us to be healers of your world. Modern Earth, Mother Earth. During this time of a global pandemic, we have learned that we are all interconnected. What happens in China, what happens in India, what happens in Washington, D.C. or Georgia or Portland impacts us all. Whether it is COVID-19 or political fighting or most of all, climate change. We have learned that we are all neighbors. Even globally, what happens to one of us happens to the next. Rabbi Joachim Prince, who helped organize the 1963 March on Washington, and he spoke immediately before Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Rabbi Prince said the following: our fathers taught us thousands of years ago, when God created man, he created him as everybody's neighbor. Neighbor is not a geographic term. It is a moral concept. It means our collective responsibility for the preservation of man's dignity and integrity. Mother Earth, in harming you, we have harmed our neighbors. Just look at the segregated city of Charlotte. It is segregated not only by race, but by socioeconomic status. We have this crescent and wedge reality, and almost all outcomes of our city are determined by the lot of land on which we live or onto which our children are born. Educational outcomes, health outcomes, exposure to environmental harm. And this pattern of disparate outcomes based on race and socioeconomic status is replicated everywhere across our country and our world. Mother Earth, the book of Psalms teaches that 1,000 years in your sight are like just a day that has gone by, like a watch in the night. You have seen religious leaders come and go for millennia, teaching and preaching lessons of collective responsibility. A first-century teacher, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the ascribed author of the Kabbalistic Zohar, taught about the ways our actions impact one another. Bar Yochai notes it's to be compared to people who are in a boat and one of them took a drill and begins to drill a hole beneath his seat. His companion said to him, "Why are you doing this?" And he replied, "What concern of it is yours? Am I not drilling under my own seat?" And they replied, "But you will flood the boat for us all." And almost 2 millennia later, Pope Francis, the leader of 1.2 billion Catholics, saw as one of his first and most significant acts the development of an encyclical on the environment published in 2015 entitled Laudato Si, Praise Be to You, with the subtitle, On Care for Our Common Home. Mother Earth, you are our common home. We are all in this together. Pope Francis expressed his concern for your health. Each year, the Pope wrote, sees the disappearance of thousands of plant and animal species, which we will never know, which our children will never see because they have been lost forever. Mother Earth, the current Pope, expressed his concerns about the way your tenants are treating you. He wrote that the warming caused by huge consumption on the part of some rich countries has repercussions on the poorest areas of the world, especially Africa, where a rise in temperature together with drought has proved devastating for farming. Mother Earth, we come here today to reflect on our relationship with you. And just like in a large family where each child has a different relationship with their parents, so as large families of faith, do we all have different understandings of our connection. To whom do you as the earth belong? We ask as people of faith. The Native American poet and scholar, Dr. Paula Gunn Allen of the Laguna Pueblo tribe, offers one answer. She writes, "We are the land." That is the fundamental idea embedded in Native American life. The earth is the mind of the people as we are the mind of the earth. The land is not really a place separate from ourselves, where we act out the dreams of our isolate destinies. It is not a means of survival, a setting for our affairs. It is rather a part of our being, dynamic, significant, real. It is ourself. The Jewish, Christian, Muslim faiths teach that the land belongs to God. God spoke all creation into being. Psalms 24 affirms the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. The Quran in Surah Al-Zukhruf similarly states everything in the heavens and in the earth belongs to the Almighty Allah. But Mother Earth, we too quickly forget that. There's a Jewish folktale of two people who were once fighting over a piece of land. Each claimed ownership. Each bolstered the claim with apparent proof. After arguing for a long time, they agreed to resolve their conflict by putting the case before a rabbi. And these two individuals, they went to the rabbi who sat as an arbiter and listened carefully. But despite his years of legal training, the rabbi could not reach a decision. Both parties seemed to be right. So finally, the rabbi said, since I cannot decide to whom the land belongs, let's ask the land. And the rabbi put an ear to the ground and after a moment stood up. He said, my friends, the land said it belongs to neither of you, but that you belong to it. Oh, earth, how easily we forget that you, the land, belong not to us, but we belong to you, and you belong also to the future. There is an ancient Iroquois philosophy called the seventh generation principle. The decisions we make today should result in a sustainable world 7 generations into the future. The decisions we make must transcend ourselves and our families. They must transcend time. Daily, we need to think about the environmental inheritance that we are leaving. Rather than depleting your resources, thinking only about now and ourselves, we need to invest in them, oh Earth. Mother Earth, we have come together today for a summit to pay a sick call. We understand that not only has humanity faced a global illness of COVID, but that you, Mother Earth, are sick as well. Your temperature is increasing. Your symptoms are getting worse, and the longer we wait to act, the more you are struggling, and consequently, we are struggling with droughts, excessive rain, extreme hot cold, more tornadoes, and more intense hurricanes. Mother Earth, your diagnosis is alarming. The harmful effect of our centuries of exploitation, especially since the Industrial Revolution, have doubled the amount of carbon dioxide in your atmosphere. Burning coal, natural gas, gasoline, and diesel fuel are emitting carbon dioxide that are depleting your ability to support us. The prognosis is fearful. Our North Carolina barrier islands will likely disappear, and many of today's coastal communities will partially be underwater by the year 2100. The consequences of your illness will impact every person and every country. Mother Earth, we are so sorry for our neglect. We are so tired. We face local challenges, national challenges, global challenges, and all of them seem so overwhelming. The Talmud, an expansive text holding centuries of great Jewish wisdom, teach this awesome concept of 1/60th. The text tells us that sleep is 1/60th of death, that dreams are 1/60th of prophecy. We need to listen to our dreams. That Shabbat, our day of rest, the Sabbath, is 1/60th of heaven. And we're taught that a person who visits the sick takes away 1/60th of their illness. So we each need to do our 1/60th part and demand that our country does the same. We don't need to each do it all, but we each need to do something. The Pope, in his 2015 encyclical, enjoined the global citizen to act. An integral ecology is also made up of simple daily gestures which break the logic of violence, exploitation, and selfishness, the Pope writes. We should also consider, he recommends, taking public transit, carpooling, planting trees, turning off the lights. and recycling. We need to demand that our local and national leaders lead to save our world before it is too late. Like the patient in a critical care unit who faces a grave crisis with multiple doctors and disciplines who are needed to figure out the path to healing, we know, Earth, that you are in need of critical care. A local scientist, an expert on environmental healing, John Dobbles, shared with me that we need to implement science-based solutions, not political solutions. We need to use not just public funds, but insist on private funds as well. We need to ensure fair and equitable implementation across all socioeconomic groups. Mother Earth, your treatment requires a change of behavior. Our turning from dependence on fossil fuels to green energy, we need to set our target of 0 carbon emissions from transportation by 2050, less than 30 years from now. Earth, the task of your rehabilitation seems overwhelming. When Moses was called to help save the Israelites from slavery, he asked with humility, "Who am I to save the Israelites from Egypt? I am slow of speech and tongue." And God appointed for Moses his brother Aaron as his accommodation and partner. And so we might likewise ask, who are we to solve this global crisis? Yet we have been given one another as partners. Moses felt apprehension in tackling an issue as big as the redemption of the entire people. How much the more so do we feel apprehension at trying to redeem the planet, our planet? John Legend, in giving a commencement address at Duke earlier this month, he told the graduates, when you feel lost in a tangled web of problems, know this truth. The way out of it is simple. It is instinctual. It is called love. Love should be your North Star. Let it guide you. What does that mean? He concludes. Love is ensuring everyone is safe from the worst consequences of the climate crisis, especially in communities already undermined and under-resourced and underwater. To paraphrase the Indigenous Australian activist Lila Watson, it means that your liberation is tied up with mine. As Professor Cornel West says it, he has a word for what this kind of love looks like in public. It looks like justice. Mother Earth, today we renew our commitment to you as we recognize that the healing you need is not beyond our ability. It is within our grasp. It is within our hands. I close with a poem by Hafiz, a 14th century Muslim poet. It is called A Love Like That. Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, you owe me. Look what happens with a love like that. It lights the whole sky. The earth would die if the sun stopped kissing her. Oh, Mother Earth, may we, like the sun, kiss you and love you daily through our actions, tending to you, and thus honoring you, honoring our past, our present, our future, and honoring all. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Judy. What a great letter to the earth, and that image of paying a sick call on Mother Earth. Terrific. Wow. Well, we know that we're at an interfaith summit, and we know that every major religion has creation care as a central tenet. And our next speaker, in representing that interfaith connection, what it could be more perfect than to have Imam John Ederer, who is the current board chair of our interfaith network here in Charlotte. It's called the Mecklenburg Metropolitan Interfaith Network, or what we call MECMEN. Imam Ederer is an author, a speaker, and a voice for social justice and environmental justice in the community. He embraced Islam in 1998, has studied formally at the Islamic University in Michigan and the Daiwan Center in Egypt. He's also mastered Arabic, spent 5 years studying in Egypt and Kuwait, and has worked with the Islam Presentation Committee, promoting intra and interfaith dialogue. He returned to America in 2009 to start career as a full-time imam at the Islamic Foundation of South Florida, and is currently the imam at the Muslim Community Center of Charlotte. He's learned from scholars and mentors from various backgrounds, and is a proponent of a moral alliance of common good among people of scriptural morality to address our widespread social and political corruption and our environmental racism and pollution. And it is my pleasure to welcome Imam John Ederer. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's a blessing to be here with you all today. I definitely will not do justice after Judy's beautiful, powerful, moving, standard presentation that she always gives. I'm honored to be on a platform with such a great speaker and activist for all that is good for all of us. So yeah, I just want to thank June Blotnick and Clean Air Carolina. I want to thank Green Faith and Amy Brooks, and obviously Eco America and Jennifer Roberts, and everybody who's coming here to kind of springboard this work that needs to take priority among us. So I'm going to try to just go through our tradition as Muslims and transition a little bit in the Abrahamic family from the Isaac bloodline through Jacob and the Israelites to the Ishmael bloodline, and the founder of the city of Mecca and the forefather of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon all of the prophets. Again, the connection is there. In Arabic, Adama is referring to the earth. And it also actually refers to darkness in terms of the dark earth. So there's this rendition at the beginning of the Quran after God lays out the reality of believers, unbelievers, and hypocrites and the struggle of faith. Then he gives a call to humanity to worship God as their provider, creator, and sustainer. And he mentions that he has created all of you and those who came before you so that you will have an appreciation for the blessing of life and everything in it. So then he goes into the story of Adam and Eve. And the beginning of that is where God calls out to the angels, telling them, I'm putting a deputy on the earth. I'm putting a vicegerent, a viceroy, a representative authority on the earth. And then he pointed to this clay figure that he had called to be put together, which is Adam. And he said, this will be the one. And so the angels then questioned God, saying, why would you choose this one? It seems they have been made privy to future problems within our humanity. And he says, why would you choose one that will cause much bloodshed and turmoil and corruption in the world? And then God says to them, I know that which you do not know. And then after that, he highlights, after giving Adam life and giving him a place in front of them, he highlights the value of Adam and his progeny as his spiritual deputies on the earth. And so basically he says, Adam, tell these angels the names of the things around you. And so then Adam starts to articulate, as we saw the beautiful articulation of Judy earlier, something I will not be able to do, his explanation of things. And so angels only know what God actually tells them, whereas humans are able to innovatively, consciously come up with intellectualizing the world around us. We have a mystical connection with creation through an understanding. And so that actually is the only reference in the Quran to the concept of a caliphate. The caliphate is the human responsibility for keeping what is good in the earth good through divine inspiration, through our natural inclination to knowledge, and through the revelations that were revealed to give us specific direction in doing God's work. And so in that, we are conscious participants in the ecosystem of the world around us, and that knowledge is our guiding force, and that the golden rule is the fundamental intellectualization of caring for others. And so we actually have to go beyond the slogan of loving our neighbor as ourselves and actively study how to best love our neighbor as ourselves. And it starts in scripture, which is what me and Judy are coming from, a root in historical scripture of prophets. And then it goes into studying the world around us and how scripture would be applied. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his entire mission was summarized in the 21st chapter of the Quran and verse number 107. And we have only sent you for one sole purpose, and that is to be an act of benevolence, of compassion, of caring concern for the word that's used, al-alameen, meaning everything that you know around you. In Arabic modern science terminology, alameen is that which is known in terms of categories. So you have the alam al-ins, is the human kingdom. Alam al-nabatat, you have the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, the insects, the meteorology and how the precipitation, these are kingdoms, these are realms. And so the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was sent as an act of benevolence to all of those things. And that is the fundamental calling of our tradition, as all prophets were also called to that. And you see it manifest in the Prophet's prohibition of cutting down trees and making a very strong exception in terms of it must be absolute necessity. You really need to cut down this tree for the big picture welfare. And he also made this very strong prohibition of not only just not harming or not killing an animal other than for food, and to be as humane in the process and to use a sharp knife and a quick cut that will relieve the animal of its life as quick as possible for the purpose of eating or for the purpose of using its hide. And so then he prohibited any harm or killing of any other animal, and he made the extensive clarity for us by saying on the day of judgment, any life form that was harmed by a human for no reason of benefit to our own, then that life form will be a witness against us on the day of judgment, and that our deeds will be siphoned from us. The goodness that we represented will be siphoned from us in order to bring justice to the crime. And so, of course, in every tradition, you have those that feel like, well, we have absolute authority over the earth. And so then that means if we can cut down all these trees and burn all these fossil fuels, well, these were made for our benefit. But there is a long-term holistic awareness of goodness that cannot be sacrificed for our immediate good. And all of the evil of humanity is described in this immediate concern for self-fulfilling desire in expense of the big picture of wholeness, of holistic nature. And so when we look in the Quran, there's this repeating phrase. It comes up in many places. وَلَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Do not cause corruption. Do not spoil the earth, right? And the word that's used here is earth, meaning that the earth is a place that was meant for goodness and wholeness, and do not cause it to become corrupt or decrepit or foul. And so one verse highlights this in a very important focus, recognizing and maintaining beauty in the earth. So in chapter 7, verse 56, God says, لا تفسدوا في الأرض بعد إصلاحها. Don't cause corruption of the earth after it was made good and whole by its creator, right? So we should recognize the goodness around us and the wholeness, and then think many times before we would ever even consider causing destruction of something that was there for our benefit already. And then he says, indeed, inna rahmatullahi qareebun min al-muhsinin. Indeed, the mercy of God is close to the altruists, meaning those who don't think for their own selfish desires, but they look for the welfare of others by their action. They look to make it a priority of thinking of the big picture of everyone's benefit over their own personal gains, which is the corruption of all bad politics, to centralize personal value and gain, or to make it in a small group's benefit in expense of everyone else's. So there's a simple way to address this from a faithful perspective, looking at this issue from this scriptural reference, that it is obvious that we are destroying the earth. No one can deny, if they actually know and see what is happening when we destroy the rainforests, which now, to my knowledge, 40% of the Earth's rainforests have been destroyed in the last 100 and some years since the Industrial Revolution. And that is the lungs of the Earth. There are millions of life forms and trees that are the means of oxygen. We're seeing the carbon go up and the oxygen go down. Every year, this is a statistic fact. We're destroying the earth, right? There's no question. We look in the oceans. We look at A Plastic Ocean, the documentary. We look at plastic that we're using and what it's causing and how we're still trying to figure out a way to get rid of it. And we don't have a real substantive way of getting rid of it. We're piling the earth like that, movie Wall-E, when we see what will happen to the earth. That is a very realistic depiction, the very, creation care oriented thought process to look at the big picture long term if we continue with plastic. When we look at the industrial crops and monoculture, the facts tell us that crops should be made locally. It shouldn't be that we wipe out whole swaths of area and then we just take out the human and the Earth's life force, the organic elements, and how crops were meant to be tilled by divine order of things, and then we erase the divine order so that we could do it quickly and make as much money. So now we just put one type of crop, and it ruins the soil permanently, and it ruins the earth. So we're called not to ruin the earth. So once we realize that, yes, before we say, okay, there's climate change and we see now the changes on the earth, let's first agree that we are destroying the earth. Once we see that, burning all these fossil fuels, we see the smoke. We see all of the carcinogens and all of the chemicals that are in that smoke. Those things are not naturally in the air. We are adding that to the air. You cannot deny that. This is the fundamental truth, that we are destroying the earth. And so we must rally around that so that then we can look to solutions and we start to see that we have gone to an extreme in our desire to make things easy and make things make a lot of money as quick as possible through technology. And so technology is not always a good thing when we see the harm in technology. So we have to go from one extreme to another. So if we've been destroying the earth and all of these cars and these planes and all these things are destroying the earth, all of this industrial corporate cropping and all of this meat being eaten and what's happening as a result of all of this meat being eaten, when we look at the effects of that, then we need to move to another extreme. You can't say, well, let's just go back to a median level once we've caused a major imbalance. In our spiritual tradition, you have to go to like if you have a problem with greed and you're struggling with that, our scholars tell us that you need to keep some money in your pocket every single day and literally force yourself to go give something away to someone, every day. So that's a very prophetic sense of altruism and benevolence, but you have to push yourself to do that. If you have a problem with gluttony, you need to fast a lot. So it's a lot. So this is the solution. And once we get things back to normal through our knowledge, which God empowered us and gave us status with, then we can start to come to a level of a medium addressing of the issue. So a lot of people are saying, yeah, we're just going to put a tax on the carbon print and we're going to do this and see, now we're starting to change a few things. No, we have gone to a massive extreme, and all of the science is telling us that we are moving away from a habitable earth. So we have to go to another extreme. We have to think outside of the box. We have to get together and mobilize. So the Quran highlights a very serious warning that we're seeing come true today in chapter 30, verse 41. And it says, corruption has spread throughout the land and the sea by the earnings of the hands of men. As such, God will cause them to feel the pain of their bad actions so that they might return. And so this verse now is being highlighted by so many scholars as very relevant to the issue of climate change and climate creation care and climate destruction. And so first he says corruption. So the same word that's used if you go spreading a racist or a oppressive system of governance on people, that's corruption. But also, if you let food spoil or you don't slaughter and relieve the meat of its blood and all of that, then you're going to cause that will spoil. And the same word for corruption is for spoiling, whether it's the natural world or the physical actions of humanity and the impact. So he says corruption is spread throughout the land and the sea by the earnings. And the word that's used here is earning, kesaba. It's the same word used for earning money, kesaba. If you asked an average Arab in the street, what is your kesab? He'll say, I work here and they give me money and that's how I pay so it's literally about earning. And so we have to realize that we have an inclination to cause destruction through the desire to earn money. And we will destroy things and people around us so that we can have power of wealth and to consolidate wealth. And then he says, by the hands of man. He doesn't say by the actions of man. The hands were given to us to do good and to help and to be a helping hand, right? The hand of God is about power. It's about mercy. It's about comfort. That is what that's about. And so we should be that for others. We should not be the hand that strikes and harms and causes destruction. And so he says that when you cause this corruption in the earth, God will then bring back the punishment on the masses if they don't choose to rectify it. And so we're seeing this pain in the massive changes in the climate of the earth. And so he said, perhaps they might return. So the plural is used in every single command in the Quran. And the Quran addresses all mankind in many places. And it addresses believers in the scripture and the Prophet of Muhammad. It addresses the Israelites, Ya Ahl Kitab, O people of the book. God is talking to everyone in this final testament he sent to Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And there's this collective need to come together, this plurality of the work of God, and leaving God to judge the religious convictions and the actual deeds and the sincerity behind them for something that will happen on the day of judgment. But the directive and the command for people to work together is fundamental, because that path, it helps us to appreciate each other's situation, our understanding of reality, our feelings, our pains, our difficulties, and we feel more inclined to help when we actually work together. If we stay in our own groups, we only understand our group's perception and we only work for our group, which is why the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, sent to probably the most tribalized community in the history of mankind. And he made statements like, leave tribalism, or dare I say nationalism, because it is putrid and filthy. And he used the same word, that the prohibition of corrupting and spoiling, that tribalism and nationalism, this racism, all of these things are meant, and they're created to divide, to gain power. And so we will appreciate that if we work together as human beings in our causes of doing what is for everybody's welfare, seeing, as Judy so beautifully pointed out, that I am you and you are I. We are one humanity, part of one creation, part of one life force, created by the one God, with one fundamental purpose, and that is to bring goodness and wholeness to the world around us. And the word that's used often in the Quran is islah, to reform what was broken, to repair what was broken, to reform what was corrupted, to bring things whole after they have been ruined. And so we realize, as we come together, the common enemy that we have in this world, which is divisive politics that supports selfish, elitist value over the overarching world welfare of everyone around us. And so profit over human welfare and stability and comfort. And that is our common enemy. And so that's why the Quran, in the context, in the chapter 5, verse 2, I will conclude with this very powerful verse of the Quran, which talked about how the Muslims had been expelled from their homeland in Mecca and sent out to live in Medina, because those polytheist tribes there were disgusted by the fact that people would believe there is only one deity, and to rebuke the worship of idols, and to believe in a moral system in which there is no tribalism, in which there is no racism, in which there is no classism, in which there is a directive of human value seen on an equal playing field between male and female, and young and old, and rich and poor, that we all are here learning and experiencing life at each other's best interests rather than at the expense of each other's best interests. And so the verse says, after talking about that, God then says, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. You must collectively cooperate with anyone and everyone, even those who expelled you from your homelands and oppressed you and abused you, on matters of righteousness and piety. But you are not allowed to cooperate with anyone on sin and enmity and hostility. If there is sin and enmity and hostility, we draw a line in the sand, and we stand boldly and clearly on the side of truth and justice. we have to educate ourselves. We have to educate our neighbors. We have to come together and mobilize the masses in a grassroots effort that we may work to repair what was broken by the powers that be in the desire for profit of a worldly material nature, so that we may promote the profit of a spiritual nature, which brings goodness and wholeness to a world that was corrupted by people who do not know or follow God and his message. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Imam Ederer, and thank you, Rabbi Schindler, for showing us that in major faith traditions that it is absolutely our responsibility to care for the creation and help. Thank you for connecting it to caring for our neighbor. Love God, love your neighbor, love the earth. These things are all connected. So if we were in an auditorium, you would both hear a resounding round of applause, but we're still in Zoom land. So you just have to use your imaginations. And I want to, on behalf of our audience, on behalf of all the folks who are with us today, to say thank you so much for helping ground us in the connection between faith and creation care and our agency, our ability and power to be that voice for God's creation and to carry that into the realm of policy, which is so important, as well as into the realm of our community, and to work together to do that. You spoke of unity, both of you, and that it takes all of us